Perfect. Perfect.
All right, everybody, what's going on? And welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk. This is the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. I'm your tour guide around the SWAC. C-Wells coming at you. And today we're going to talk a little bit of Southern football. And I'm not going to be fussing about Southern on this show. This is something fun and nice. So don't worry about, this being one of them Southern videos that I've been making in recent weeks. So we're going to have a little fun today. I want to shout out Coach 67 Sports TV on YouTube, man. Y'all check his channel out. He did a video last week where he broke down his top 5 Southern quarterbacks of the Pete Richardson modern era. So I decided I wanted to do it too. I hollered at him, asked him if it was all right if I took it, because I didn't want to just take a topic that somebody did. So I hit him up and asked him, he was like, yeah, man, it's cool. So I decided to do 10. I decided to do my top 10 modern Southern quarterback. So I'm 47 years old, so my time in Southern football goes back to the 80s. So I decided to kind of go from, when I really started to understand Southern football to the present time. So I listed my top 10 guys and one honorable mention. So I came up with like 11 guys, because I never do exactly 10 or 5 or whatever. I always got to do a little bit more. So I got 11 guys, 10 top 10 and one honorable mention. And I'm going to just talk about them and, give my thoughts on why I put these guys in the position that I did. And, you can go from there. You can let me know in the comments, what's your top 10, who's your all-time guy. Or you can help me put together a list like this for other schools too. So, if you want to do a top 10, whatever, a JSU quarterback list or a top 10 all-corn quarterback list, Bama A&M, FAMU, whoever, man, hit me up. We can work it out, and I'll make a video on that too. So y'all can make sure y'all hit those socials. Facebook is SWAC Talk, Instagram SWAC Talk, Twitter SWAC Talk 76. I will be doing more of my basketball content on my Bustin' Brackets site. I'm going to be doing most of my basketball content writing there. So if you want to get my thoughts on any game, recap or preview or power rankings or anything like that, hit up the site, bustinbrackets.com. I'm gonna always link my upcoming article on my socials. So I have an article coming up sometime this week about the Southern Grambling game, the recap of that demolishing that Grambling put on Southern. So definitely hit the socials up to get that, and keep tabs on the socials for any other content that I drop on that site. I'm still gonna do basketball stuff here, but I'm probably going to do more in-depth basketball stuff over there, since that's more basketball focused. This will be, everything and anything. So with that being said, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We almost at 1,200 subscribers, man. We getting there. I'd like to thank y'all for helping me reach that goal and any other goal we've already reached. Thank y'all for helping out a lot with that. Hit that like button. Feel free to comment your thoughts on the topic. And like I said before, if you want to come up with a list for other teams, you can hit me on my socials. Or you can hit the email swagtalk76@gmail.com and let me know, and we can work it out, and I'll make a video on it. Like I said, like the video, share, feel free to comment, and on to the list, man. We're gonna start off with our honorable mention. My honorable mention guy is Sam George. He was a guy who had a lot of opportunities to be the starting quarterback at Southern in the post-Eric Randall era, but he had a lot of off the field academic type issues that kind of held him back a little bit. So he wasn't able to really take a hold of the job until 1998. After Marcus Jacoby left after the first game, he took the reins of the team then and led Southern to a SWAC championship in 1998 and a berth in the Heritage Bowl, which they defeated Bethune-Cookman by a score of 28-2. The one thing, if you know Sam George, the one thing you know is he was a small guy. He was like 5'7", had a really good arm, had swag out the you know what. He was a guy who just really believed in his abilities. He could make plays. He could throw the ball. You know, he could scramble. He did a lot. He ended up passing for 1,935 yards in 1998 and 20 touchdowns. Like I said, he led Southern to a 9-3 record, SWAC championship, and a Heritage Bowl victory. One thing about him was he was a stunt double in any given Sunday. You can actually see him on screen in the locker room, the big locker room scene. If you've seen the movie, you know which locker room scene I'm talking about. He's one of the guys in the locker room when Jamie Foxx is in there talking to the owner. So he had a little brush with celebrity there. And like I said, he was a guy who always was on the cusp of being the guy, but he, you know, so many things kind of conspired against him to keep him from taking the reins sooner than he did. But he made the most of his opportunity, and his game in the Bayou Classic in '98 was one of the best games I've seen from a quarterback. Really put up some great numbers, had a great offense that year, and he was the general of that offense. My number 10 guy on my list is Terrence Levy. Rest in peace, first and foremost, to Terrence Levy. He was a guy who his star shined a lot brighter than his time at Southern did. He's known primarily by most people for taking over in the 1999 Bayou Classic when Troy Williams got injured in that game. Southern was losing. He came in and led Southern to a 38-31 victory over Grambling in the Bayou Classic. And he helped Southern win the first ever SWAC championship game against Jackson State. He was more of a gunslinger type of guy. You know, he wasn't the most polished guy. He wasn't, he didn't always have the best, prettiest games, but he always made plays. And if you remember, even the beginning of the SWAC championship game, wasn't really playing well. But he caught fire, made a couple of huge throws to Devin Lewis and Michael Hayes. Same thing, in 2000, he took over for Troy Williams again, and finished off the season there. 2001 was his first season as pretty much a full-time starter before he went down with injury late in the season. But he was a guy who, his legend is in 1999. Most people, if you ask them about Terrence Levy, they remember him in 1999. He had a really spectacular offense in 2001. The team didn't necessarily have, the best of records in that time there. I think they went like 6-5 and 7-4 in those couple of years. But, he was a guy who made the plays. He was a playmaker. He was, like I said, a gunslinger. He was a guy who could make you pull your hair out on one play, and then on the next play, man, he could make you just say, "Oh my God, look at this throw he just made." So he never really had the time that was really his. He was kind of a guy in between times, but he made the most of his opportunities, and he did a lot to help Southern. Obviously one of his lower points, I guess, and I won't put it all on him, was the Heritage Bowl in '99. Coming off of a big Bayou Classic win and a Heritage and a SWAC championship game win. Rematch against Hampton. Hampton was more than able and ready to play in that game, and they beat Southern 24-3 in that game. So that last 2.5 games of the '99 season is probably where he's most known. Like I said, he didn't really start a lot in 2000, and then 2001 was his time, but went down on injury. So that's why he's number 10. Well, some people might have him higher because of his legend in those few games, but I feel like with the guys on the list, I put him there, and that's no disrespect to be there because there are some really great guys on the list ahead of him. My number 9 guy is Thomas Ricks, and he is a guy who started 1 year at Southern. In 2004, he came in between, the Quincy Richard era and then, the Brian Lee era. He was kind of like the guy in between that. He was a senior in 2004. Took over a team who lost a lot of guys from the previous season. Started off kind of slow, but by mid-October, the offense caught fire. Southern ended up 8-3 and won the West Division. Lost to Bama State in the SWAC championship game, but that game against Alabama State in Montgomery in 2004 was one of the craziest games that you'll ever see. Southern scored, a few, like 2 or 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to come from behind and win that game on the road. And then the SWAC championship game in 04 was another shootout against Tavares Jackson. So this was, a guy who could run the ball. He probably was at that point the best runner that Southern had at quarterback, before like the 80s or whatever. But he was like a guy who was a big guy. He could carry the ball. He could throw the ball. His offense didn't necessarily have a lot of big name guys, but they made a lot of plays, and he was probably one of the precursors to that Ladarius Skelton type of guy. Now, he probably was a better passer than Skelton, but he was a guy who, could make the plays, run the ball, get the tough yardage. And he led Southern to a nice stretch from October to the end of the season and got them to the SWAC championship game. So didn't have a lot of time as a starter at Southern. Was a guy who just waited his turn and waited his turn and waited his turn. And then when his turn came, he took advantage of it. Guys like that you don't see too often anymore because of the transfer portal. Guys are not going to really just a lot of guys aren't going to just sit and wait till their time comes around and then take advantage of it. But, he did. And that backfield he had with him and Steele Adams was one of the better, stronger backfields between a running back and a quarterback that I've seen at Southern in my time. Number 8 is going to be controversial. I'm going to say that off rip. So a lot of people probably wouldn't even put this guy on their list for a variety of reasons. But number 8, I put Marcus Jacoby. Obviously, if you know who he is, if you don't, he is the kid. He was the first and only at this point white quarterback at Southern. He came in 96. Kind of didn't necessarily get the job in the best circumstances. That job was supposed to be for Sam George, coming off of the post-Eric Randall era. But like I said, some academic issues and things kept George off the field. But Lionel Hayes, who was a Baton Rouge guy, was also in the mix for the job. He lost that job to Jacoby. Hayes went to Grambling and had a great career. But that was a situation where, that was a lot of attention there because this kid was white. He was a Baton Rouge guy as well, but, he was from the other side of town, didn't ingratiate himself as best as he could out the gate to Southern. And he had an up and down career at Southern. 96 was a rough year for him. 97, he helped lead Southern to a SWAC championship. He helped defeat South Carolina State in the Heritage Bowl in 1997. Lost to Howard in 96 in a game Southern was winning 24-10. Had a record of 18-6 as a starter at Southern. In 97, he threw for 1,423 yards and 13 touchdowns. He didn't necessarily light the world on fire, but he had a solid year and a half. 98 was a year that probably should have been his year, but he quit after the first game of the season, and he was never really seen or heard from again in terms of Southern University. So that's why I feel like this is a guy who is a controversial name to put on this list. But I felt like the work that he played for some solid teams, but the work he did, especially in 97, to help lead that offense, battling a returning Sam George in 97. Being able to hold that job and help the team win, you have to recognize that. And, that's why I put him there. You can slide him anywhere. I don't really think he's a top 5 guy at Southern, but, I think anywhere like 8, 7, 9, 8, 10, I think that's a fair spot for him. So that's why I put him there. Number 7 is a guy that a lot of people, if you're younger, you probably never even heard his name. If you're older, you've heard his name before. This is probably one of the first quarterbacks I remember at Southern, and that's Nathaniel Harrison. He played at Southern from 87 to 91. He was another local Baton Rouge guy. He was a guy who, at the time when he finished his career at Southern, he finished with 5,440 yards, making him the all-time leading passer at that time, which is something that, thinking back, I never recognized him as that because I never really, as a young kid, I never really understood or saw what I was seeing He finished with a record of 27-27-1 in his time at Southern. Weren't really great teams. Those were like those late Marino Castle years at Southern, where Southern finally started winning 7 games. So it was like a different time for Southern. He was a true athlete guy. He was a guy who could run the ball. He could kick the ball. He can throw. He was a guy who can do a little bit of everything. And he was, that guy off the field too. So if you know, you know. But definitely one of the most underrated quarterbacks at Southern, a guy who doesn't necessarily get the recognition that a lot of people, a guy who ended up being the best quarterback at Southern at that time in terms of statistics, should deserve more recognition than he got. So, that's why I feel like number 7 was a perfect spot for him. I really wish there was more information and stuff from the Southern website about some of these guys, because it would be great to be able to point to something to show, what he did, because he definitely put in a lot of work on teams that were not great. They were starting to make that turn. A lot of the guys on those late years teams were guys who were seniors on the first Pete Richardson team. So that group of guys who went 27-27-1 in that time span laid the foundation unknowingly to all of us, laid that foundation to the 93 championship team and beyond. So, that's what makes this guy special in that aspect, because he was a part of a team that laid the foundation that we didn't know was being laid, but laid the foundation to those great teams to follow. So, being probably at that point the top quarterback to come out of Southern at that time definitely deserves to be on the list, and that's why he is at number 7. A number 6 guy is a guy who probably could have been a top 3 guy if turnovers and whatever happened with him and the coaching staff in 21, didn't get in the way. Ladarius Skelton could have been probably one of, if not the best quarterback to come out of Southern before his last year, which really derailed a lot of his numbers. He played at Southern from 2018 to 2021. Obviously, that spring of 2021 season, shortened season, so his numbers weren't that high. But this is a guy who was a 4-time Bayou Classic MVP. That's something that's never been done before. Obviously, it hasn't been done since he won his last MVP in 2021. There's only been 2 classics since then, so it hasn't been done before or since. He was a guy who made big plays in big games. Had some plays that make you scratch your head, but he was a guy who, whenever you felt like you needed to play a quarterback, he could make it for you, whether it was with his legs, which he finished his career at Southern running for over 1,800 yards and 30 touchdowns. He threw for over 3,600 yards and 30 touchdowns in his time at Southern. He didn't even start his first game until the mid-season point of 2018 against Prairie View, which he led that team to a 38-0 victory over Prairie View in a game that nobody really knew who this guy was, and he led that offense to he led that team to, I believe, 5 straight victories and a SWAC championship berth, which they lost to Alcorn. In 2019, he started the whole season, led Southern back to the SWAC championship game and another loss to Alcorn. But the spring of 2021, he had a solid season again. And then in the fall, injury and then some, issues with coaches and some off the field type stuff kind of derailed his position as a starting quarterback. Became more of an all-purpose type of guy. Became a solid kick returner, was a short yardage runner, did a lot of other things, but, quarterback was probably his spot. But, that last year derailed his ranking on this list. So that's why he's not a top 5 guy. Although if you're a guy who, follows him closely and follow his career, you might put him higher. Like, a lot of people who from Pine Bluff, he's a legend from there. And, I can see, people like that ranking him higher. And I would having a problem with that. The only reason why he's not higher on my list is because that last season, was unfulfilled promise for whatever reason. So that's why he finished at number 6. But He was 17-9 as a starter. Like I said, didn't even take over until the mid portion of the other 2018 season, and honestly wasn't really sure he was going to start in 2019, but he took that job and ran with it and became the guy for that year and a half between then and the spring season. So definitely could make plays with his legs and his arms. Was an exciting guy. Sometimes made you hold your breath, but he always made you feel like you had a chance in the game. Even if he made a bad play, you always feel like he could make a good play to make up for it. So he was just one of those guys that you had to kind of live with the bad to get the good. And that's why he is always going to be on a list, any list for Southern quarterbacks. He's going to always be considered to me because of that nature. We're in the top 5 now, and the guy I put at number 5, I personally, if I said, if you asked me who was my all-time favorite quarterback, this guy would probably be my number 1 guy, and that's Quincy Richard. The only reason why I have him at 5 and not 1 on this list is because he played basically 2 years at Southern, but that 2003 year at Southern was a tremendous year for him offensively. 3,270 yards passing, 31 touchdowns. He had over 500 yards and like 4 or 5 touchdowns in the 2003 Bayou Classic, which was a shootout against Bruce Eugene and Grambling. If you haven't seen that game, look it up on YouTube. That game was an offensive explosion. Both guys were throwing the ball all over the field. He was a 2003 SWAC Offensive Player of the Year. Like I said, he played in the 2001 Bayou Classic, but 2002 was his first starting year, and he got kind of injured in that year. 2003 was his senior year, and he put up tremendous numbers. That offense was amazing. And just on the strength of that one season, he is like my favorite quarterback in that era because, like I said, he could run the ball, but he was more of a passer first. He could take off if he needed to, but if you gave him time to throw, he could pick you apart in that offense, led by offensive coordinator at the time, David Oliver. That offense was just like, basketball on grass, so, 4 receivers, 5 receivers, guys all over the field catching balls, and just, that offense was just amazing. And that's why, strictly on the strength of one season, he is a top 5 quarterback. That team, won the SWAC. That was the first SWAC championship Southern won since '99. So, they went 11-1. Lost to Alcorn on a last second play, but definitely was a guy who put in the work in his time at Southern, and that's why he's a top 5 guy. My number 4 guy is Bryant Lee. This is a quarterback that doesn't really get a lot of the recognition that he deserves. Again, he was the all-time leading passer when he left Southern. He finished his career with 7,654 yards and 65 touchdowns. In 2009, he was the SWAC Offensive Player of the Year. He was 25-19 in his time at Southern. This is like the end of the Pete Richardson era, so these teams weren't necessarily great teams, although that 07 team was pretty good. The 09 team had a chance to win a couple big games, but came up short. They lost a really tough Thursday night game to the eventual SWAC championship Prairie View team. But he had some really great weapons in Jamarius Stewart and Dale Roberts at receiver. A guy who, like I said, a lot of people don't really look at his name when you look at quarterbacks. He was a heady type of guy. He could make the plays. He was a guy who was tough. He could make the throws that were needed, and he was a solid leader for this team. Just kind of was a guy who didn't really get I almost kind of got lost in the shuffle about what came after him, and being in the fact that he was in that late Pete Richardson era where the program was in flux, and then it was like the downward portion of the Stump Mitchell days after that. So it kind of got lost in that shuffle, but definitely easily a top 5 quarterback in the history of Southern University modern football. So he deserves that number 4 spot. A number 3 guy, again, is a guy who could probably be higher depending on how you look at it, and that's Dre Joseph. He played at Southern from 2010 to 2013. He was a guy who split time as a freshman Ultimately ended up really taking the reins of the job around 2012. He led Southern to a 2013 SWAC championship under Coach Odoms. Left Southern with 8,735 passing yards and 73 touchdowns, which made him the all-time leading passer at Southern when he left. Now, the teams he played on, other than that SWAC championship team, were not good. He finished 18-28, but that 2013 season is probably the season that really puts him on this list. He was another guy who can really throw that ball. He was another guy who was tough as nails. Just a guy who from Edgar, Louisiana, just one of those grinding out type guys, that could make plays. And that offense in 2013 was amazing with a young Leonard Tillery at running back, Lee Doss at receiver. Just had a lot of guys that were able to make a lot of plays. In that Prairie View game in 2013, where Southern won, I think was 62-59 or something like that. That was the game that turned Southern season around in 2013 and helped bolster them to a SWAC championship. So just by nature of him having a career where he basically was a starter off and on his whole career, and then took hold, of the job his junior year, and then his senior year he had a breaking out and winning a SWAC championship that definitely puts him there. For me, I don't have, with that SWAC championship, if you look at rings over anything else, then that SWAC championship game could put him in the top two. But to me, I think rings are important, but sometimes when you play affects what you win. And for me, that's the reason. That's what makes the number two guy my number two guy. He didn't get the rings, and that's Austin Howard. He didn't get the rings because he played at Southern during a point where Grambling had those two great teams in 16 and 17 with Devontae Kincaid and Martez Carter and all those guys. But he did, as a freshman, help lead Southern to a SWAC championship game in 2014. He played at Southern from 2014 to 2017. When he left Southern, he was the all-time leading passer. He also is a guy from West St. John High School, which is where Dre Joseph played high school ball at. So, that's kind of like that pipeline. He was a 4-year starter, threw for 9,268 yards and 80 touchdowns. He had tremendous offenses, of course, guys like Willie Quinn, Mike Jones, all those type of guys, Leonard Tillery at running back. He finished his career 30-16 at Southern as a starting quarterback. Like I said, had a chance in 14 against Alcorn, but came up short in that game and couldn't get back because Grambling won the West the next 3 years. So playing against teams who were great teams, he was like they were the next best team. And so that takes rings away from him. So I can understand if you don't value him higher because of the lack of rings, but just strictly numbers, he did work. And with that 17 team, losing the guys that they had and really having to almost, put together guys on the fly and, using a guy like Danny Johnson, who was an all-conference defensive back, as an all-purpose receiver, runner type of guy in that offense, also helped make that offense even more explosive. And, knowing that he was the guy on this offense, he still had games where he threw for over 400 yards against Prairie View in his senior year. He lit up the scoreboard in a lot of games. Just never got that championship. If he had that, he would easily be the number one guy for me. But to me, my number one guy is the guy who started the run of modern, Pete Richardson era and beyond quarterbacks, and that's Eric Randall. Again, another Baton Rouge guy on this list. Started basically, I think, like the midpoint of his freshman season in 1992. He helped lead Southern to a 93 championship. He battled Steve McNair 2 times, won one, lost one. That 93 Alcorn Southern game is an instant classic. The 94 Alcorn Southern game was also a classic that Alcorn won when Steve McNair set the total yardage NCAA record. He led Southern to a Heritage Bowl in 93 and 95. The 95 offense was probably the precursor to those Pete Richardson offenses to follow. They started to open up the offense more that year. And they had two great games against FAMU. One was like a 52-35 game, I believe, something like that in Atlanta, in the Atlanta Football Classic. And then they won 30-25 in the Heritage Bowl against FAMU in 95. He was also the all-time leading passer at Southern when he left. So these guys are guys who laid the foundation for whatever's to follow. And Eric Randall is definitely that guy. He was, a guy who could run the ball. Obviously, he could throw it. He had some great receivers in his time. He had some great running backs in his time. He wasn't scared to, put the team on his back and get those tough yards that he needed. He always seemed to play higher when the level of the game was higher. Just being able to see that team in 93 win a championship, which was something I had never saw in my lifetime at that point. The guy stood up in front of the school at a prep rally before the 93 season and said they was going undefeated, and everybody laughed at him. And they had the last laugh, going 8-0 in conference and going to the Heritage Bowl and beating South Carolina State 11-0. So, that's a guy who is like the foundation to everything that followed. And you have to give all the props and respect to him. I mean, he's a guy who did the work and grinded and stayed the course even when chips were down, and was able to see the fruits of that labor pay off. So that's why he is my #1 quarterback of all time in my lifetime at Southern. I think it's going to take a very, very special guy to knock him off that pedestal in the future. Now, who knows what's coming up in the next few years. Maybe that guy is already on campus. Maybe that guy's coming soon. We don't know. You never know what greatness is going to be around the corner, because when I was little, I never thought I would ever be able to see a day where I can list 11 guys who are top guys in Southern history in football, let alone guys who rank among some of the top quarterbacks in the modern time in the SWAC. So this is a special list of guys. And, I hope, if you had a chance to witness these guys, I hope you appreciate what you saw. I really wish a lot more information was out there for these guys, because they deserve the flowers that they get. And also any guy from anybody else's school who put in the work and grinded and became a legend, they need those flowers, man. You have to get those guys those flowers while they're still here, because, you never know when you'll lose a guy. So it's always good to get that recognition to these guys while they're there. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC signing out, and I will catch y'all on our next edition of SWAC Talk, and we'll holler at y'all later. Peace.